The tide of this war between Russia and Ukraine continues to be favorable to Russia. If something's head is cut off, the body will eventually fail. Since the beginning of the Russian invasion of their country, the Ukrainian army has done the same, purging several Russian generals. The death in his own yard of the last Russian commander was a huge blow to the Russians. Since then, the Ukrainians have been on high alert due to a power disparity among the commander's soldiers. Major General Yuri Afanasievsky of the Russian security services was severely hurt when an explosion went off in his Luhansk residence. Afanasievsky was the head of customs in the territory of Ukraine that Vladimir Putin annexed, Luhansk. Afanasievsky was an agent for the Moscow headquarters of the Federal Security Service, according to the Ukrainian intelligence source. According to the source, Afanasievsky was notorious in this position for funneling dirty money to paramilitary groups that fought against Ukraine. The flat of Yuri Afanasievsky was the target of the special operation. Afanasievsky suffered shrapnel injuries to the head, neck, and belly during the procedure. This has resulted in Afanasievsky's continued serious status in the ICU. Yuri Afanasievsky, age 64, and his son are both in extremely grave condition at the hospital. According to Russia Today, the explosion also hurt Afanasievsky's wife. Some information regarding the attack has been made public. A cell phone handed to Afanasievsky by a sabotage group in Ukraine turned out to be rigged with explosives. Russian intelligence believed the attack was carried out by the Ukrainian SBU Secret Service. A female suspect was captured in the Russian-occupied Luhansk People's Republic. The FSB is looking into allegations that she attempted murder and gave an FSB officer explosives. During the course of the investigation, the woman in question allegedly admitted to giving Afanasievsky an explosive-laden cell phone. The Russian Investigative Committee has made it public that they have arrested the perpetrator, who has reportedly already confessed. The Russian Investigative Committee released a statement saying that they had questioned several witnesses and seized several items in relation to the blast. Multiple injuries were sustained by both the man and his son. They're currently receiving care at a hospital. Ukrainian soldiers have done more than this to the enemy. Russian artillery, once revered as the god of war in Moscow, is now falling from grace. Russian artillery is abandoning long-held doctrine as deteriorating tactical conditions force a change. In the past, Russia's military might has relied more on sheer numbers than precision. Despite Moscow's initial large-scale invasion of Ukraine, this has been the case, although a recent report suggests that this may be changing. The research sheds light on a number of issues. To begin, the Russian forces don't have enough ammo to keep up this level of fire for very long. Second, the logistics behind such a massive fire make it easy to spot and target with pinpoint accuracy. As a third point, the decline in this mass strategy for firefighting is reflected in the loss of counter batteries, radar, and barrel wear. Accuracy, rather than sheer firepower, is increasingly a priority for Russian artillery. The Russian military likewise has a relatively low human capital. Whether they are soldiers or officers makes no difference. Russia's production capability will be an obstacle, even if it is successful in educating a well-trained military. Once again, Ukrainian warriors cornered and decimated enemy forces in the Zaporizhzhia Valley. Many enemy soldiers were killed or wounded, while 22 pieces of artillery and 12 tanks were destroyed in this onslaught. The General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces estimates that so far in this fight, the Ukrainian side has destroyed 5,582 artillery systems, 8,641 armored personnel carriers, APCs, and almost 264,000 Russian soldiers. The Ukrainian military has made new gains in the past few days. At the outset, additional data has surfaced regarding the recent Ukrainian attack on the defensive line south of Botany. As we've established, Russian forces have devastated the landscape, fortifying a hilltop that the Ukrainians have struggled to take for years. Russian sources have finally established the reasons why the Ukrainians were able to suddenly take all of the defenses in a single onslaught. After waiting for the Russian troops to rotate, the Ukrainians began their assault. The result was a successful surprise attack by Ukrainian forces. The antagonists suggested that victory was within reach. But the most prominent Russian analysts still maintained that Russian forces were stationed on Botany's southern edges. Analysts in Russia, however, kept working on the assumption that the Ukrainians had blocked Russian entry to the town. It became increasingly clear that the offensive measures taken by the Ukrainians were successful as time went on, mostly due to the fact that Ukrainian warriors disseminated themselves across the streets of the villages and made themselves evident to everyone. Russian intelligence began to feel uneasy after they discovered that the Ukrainians had sent reinforcements to Robotny. Because every time reinforcements are brought to such places, the Ukrainian fighters take them back. This result was to be expected, as both the Russians and the Ukrainians currently enjoy the same strategic advantages. According to the topographical chart, this location is high up on a hill, giving the Ukrainians command of the entire area with their artillery. The Russians, in response, hastily organized their forces and immediately began launching counterattack after counterattack. The Russians initially tried to ambush the Ukrainians in the middle of the night. They did this by sending a large number of attack forces during the night after making substantial artillery preparations throughout the day to weaken the defenses. This helped them succeed in their mission. However, the Russians could be seen clearly in the distance. This allowed Ukrainians to become aware of them far before their actual arrival. The Ukrainians let the Russians get as close as they dared. Ukrainian forces were busy at the moment setting up an ambush for the enemy troops. Minutes later, the Russian assault unit was completely wiped out as Ukrainian forces fired in all directions at once. The destruction dealt to the invading Russians was a major setback for them. Even though they were on the edge of annihilation, the Russians put up a brave last stand. The Russian military conducted repeated attacks throughout the day against the Ukrainian insurgents, but they were easily repelled. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't be stopped. The Ukrainian military successfully repelled all of Russia's assaults, suggesting that the Ukrainians had ample time to clear the region and prepare for a defensive position. The Russian commanders soon realized that attacking this fortress from just one side wouldn't be enough, so they shifted tactics. The Russians this time decided to launch simultaneous attacks on the Ukrainians from the west and the south. The primary goal was to cut off supplies and reinforcements to the defenses, while the secondary goal was, if feasible, to split the Ukrainian forces in two. The Russian forces initially broke through and threatened to encircle the area. Ukrainian troops were stationed to the south of the settlement. Reports from Russian war correspondents indicated that the Ukrainians had fortified Robotny soon after this operation. This data was made available right after the assault. In the end, the Russian flank attack was thwarted by a counterattack by Ukrainian forces. The Russian invaders were eventually forced out from the region they had taken after a fierce battle. While this was happening, Ukrainian fighters were able to maintain control of crucial areas from which they could launch attacks on Novoprokopivka. The Ukrainians' plans relied heavily on these vantage points. As they watch the Ukrainian forces make progress, the Russian military is also in a state of dismay. This is what will happen if Russia does not terminate this illegal occupation. Soldiers have always switched loyalties in conflicts throughout history. Russian soldiers have naturally defected and sided with Ukraine during the unlawful seizure of Ukrainian territory. A Russian pilot brought a Mi-8 helicopter to a landing at Kharkiv's Poltava military air base around 2 weeks ago. There was a lot of press about the incident. Despite its primary use as a transport helicopter, the Mi-8 can be converted into a mobile command post, battleship, or spy plane. The other 2 crew members were taken aback when the Russian pilot successfully landed the helicopter at the Ukrainian air base. The rest of the team must not have been aware of what had happened. The tragedy was the result of a secret conspiracy that had been going on for 6 months, according to Andrei Yusop, a spokesman for Ukraine's Military Intelligence Directorate. A Kursk-based Mi-8 helicopter was later stolen under similar circumstances. It's clear that Mi-8 helicopters play a crucial part in this conflict. In both Russian and Ukrainian news outlets, this was the day's top story. The news had such a profound effect on the Russian people that it was widely disseminated across multiple platforms. Maxim Kuzminov was revealed to be the helicopter's pilot after it was stolen. The pilot's identity was concealed in the earlier helicopter incident. Defense Intelligence Chief for Ukraine, Kirill Budanov, has reported that a deal has been struck with pilot Kuzminov, who has agreed to ensure the safe departure of his family from Russia. Upon reflection of the event, the device may have become disoriented in earlier versions. When the Russian pilot landed the helicopter on Ukraine's boundaries last week, Russia made the same statement. However, the Ukrainian side quickly provided the official version after its release. According to Ukrainian Defense Ministry Chief of Intelligence Kirill Budanov, Russian pilot Maxim Kuzminov brought the helicopter into Ukrainian territory. Budanov claims that Kuzminov was persuaded to conduct this operation by members of the military's intelligence community. He was accompanied by 2 other crew members. The pilot said that he had made efforts to restore order. But then things got a little violent among the team. 2 crew members escaped the Mi-8 and raced towards the Ukrainian border when the helicopter landed in the country. Ukrainian forces were willing to give the crew another chance, but the crew members ultimately decided to abandon ship. The crew had to liquidate the Ukrainian soldiers. Kuzminov, who worked in Pamurai as part of the Army Aviation's 319th Independent Helicopter Regiment, gave a news conference in Kiev today. He stated that he had followed the prearranged strategy by flying at a low altitude with no radio communication. Russia's feelings were deeply hurt by these words. Kuzminov claims he just knows how to operate the helicopter and that there are no armaments on board. Maxim Kuzminov went public with his intention to resign from the Russian Air Force. In the film Fallen Russian Pilots, I explained my predicament to officials of Ukrainian intelligence. The Ukrainian government assured me of my safety, provided me with fresh paperwork, compensated me monetarily, and rewarded me. My direct flight was discussed, and preparations were made. It took around 6 months to finish the asylum operation with the code name Sinetsia. To enter Ukraine undetected, I flew at a very low altitude while in radio silence. No one could tell me what was wrong. For about 3 or 4 days, it seems, no one knew what was going on. The current situation in Ukraine is nothing short of a genocide. A battle that no one wants. To all my fellow Russian pilots, I hope you follow in my footsteps. Do it, and you won't be sorry. You will see a rainbow of new hues and be reminded of how little you actually know. It's possible you've never even left your own country. The Russian Federation's Defense Ministry has not issued a statement in response to the recent events. What else is there to say after all these declarations? Russia may choose to remain silent on the matter because of the national embarrassment it would bring. Russia's own military personnel are no excuse. In addition, the worldwide controversy that this documentary's release has sparked is unprecedented. Meanwhile, the enemy forces on the front lines are weakened to the point where they can no longer fight effectively. Ukrainian soldiers have spent months honing their ability to strike at the adversary when they are vulnerable. Ukrainian forces in the Donetsk region today attacked a company of sloppy Russian soldiers and their gear. The Ukrainian armed forces have destroyed a Russian military supply facility in the Donetsk region. The Ukrainian military's highest command ordered the attack footage to be made public through their Strategic Communications Department. The authorities issued a report after the video went viral. The report claims that at around 14:30 last night, Ukrainian forces destroyed an invading warehouse containing military equipment near the Myronivsky urban hamlet in the Donetsk region. Russia has now lost an estimated 265,680 servicemen in the conflict in Ukraine, an increase from before this attack. The Ukrainian army is always at war. Ukrainian forces are still making advances toward Bakhmut and Melitopol. The Ukrainian military's top brass issued a report on the state of affairs in the country and the surrounding area. Both Robotny and Novoprokopivka were successfully defeated. The positions were retaken after our artillery engaged in counter-battery engagement and caused fire damage on designated enemy objectives. The General Staff has taken note of ongoing offensive actions by Ukrainian forces to the south of the town in the rearward direction. The adversary has lost a lot of soldiers, guns, and equipment. Ukrainian defenders are simultaneously preventing a Russian push toward Avdiivka and Marinka. The Russians tried to launch offensives near Marinka, but they were ultimately unsuccessful. North of Nova Hirovka, Hylohorivka, and Klishivka on the Lyman and backward axis, the Russian occupation army launched futile assault missions. The region is still seeing intense fighting. The Ukrainian General Staff has estimated that as of September 5, the number of Russian military casualties in Ukraine had reached 265,680. That's a very sizable sum. The Ukrainian military has made significant headway towards Zaporizhia as well. The Ukrainian Defense Forces are pushing forward in the direction of Zaporizhia, capturing the settlements of Nova Prokopivka, Nirobotny, Mala Tokmachka, and Orkari-Tovat. Earlier, we mentioned that taking Robotny would pave the way to other regions. Ukrainian forces made progress in Yuroshiny-Robotny while facing extremely severe battle conditions. Near Staromayesk, Ukrainian forces have also found success heading into Melitopol and Berdyansk, and they are currently conducting a successful offensive to advance toward Novo-Prokopivka. In this part of the front, counterattacks and active destruction of the enemy are still going on. According to Tavrir Defense Forces spokesman Alexander Shutpin, Russian occupants are attempting to exert pressure on Ukrainian soldiers in the area of Avdiivka and Marinka. But the Ukrainian resistance was unfazed by the Russian invaders' tactics. Shutpin added that in the Tabriat direction, Ukrainian forces had captured 17 invaders in the last day. Shutpin further elaborated, saying that the Russians had made some minor improvements to their aviation component. There have been more airstrikes recently. Russia's increased firepower is obviously not enough to halt the progress of Ukrainian forces. We also have some bad news to report, despite all the positives. The first British-supplied Challenger 2 tank lost by the Ukrainian military. It seems the tank was damaged south of the newly liberated town of Rabotny. The British tank's demise is a mystery. Researchers examined footage from inside the tank. As a result, experts began to speculate that Challenger 2 had entered a region where artillery bombardment was occurring. The side armor of a Ukrainian T-64 tank that was around 50 to 60 meters away showed signs of shell splinter damage. Sure, people die in wars. The number of Russian invaders is much larger than the number of Ukrainian fighters who have died. Russia is the one that needs to be concerned and angry. Russia hasn't done anything to be ready for winter yet. Ukraine has not noticed any signs that Russian soldiers are taking preparations to prepare for winter, according to Natalia Hermanuk, head of the Joint Coordination Press Office of the Southern Defense Soldiers. Hermanuk provided some commentary on the issue. Perhaps the difficulty of coordinating their efforts has delayed their action. There isn't much time to bring in new units of equipment to replace damaged or destroyed pieces and yet meet current ammunition and protective equipment needs. However, the damage that Ukrainian fighters have done on Russian supplies is plain to see. The operation of the Ukrainian forces, who are clearly thinking a few steps ahead and now placing the enemy soldier in a difficult situation, explains why we have not seen such a significant delivery of winterization goods. With such resolve, insight, and faith, Ukrainian soldiers are sure to win the war. 2 distinct Iranian Shahed drones are shot down by the German-supplied Gepard anti-aircraft cannon using short bursts of fire. I agree 100%. True, though. Here is some extremely rare footage of an Abrams 10RC in action on the Bakhmut front in Ukraine. A woman calmly threw rocks through the glass and set fire to the Russian military recruitment office in St. Petersburg. Russia's domestic opposition is strengthening. Somewhere in the combat zone, a Ukrainian FPV kamikaze drone crashes into a Russian T-72 tank. Only in the shape of the rusted scrap metal on display in Kiev will we allow Russian tanks onto our territory. The 68th Brigade appears to have added at least 2 more displays to its exhibition. Right. Ukrainian Defense Ministry tweets. After learning that her husband, who had been in the military, had been murdered in Ukraine, an employee at Aeroflot suffered a mental breakdown. Ukrainian soldiers from the Steel Border Brigade hoisted the national flag over the devastated cities of Stryfika and Topoli. These little towns can be found in the Kharkiv region, close to the Russian border. Since the victorious Ukrainian offensive last autumn, no one has ventured into this area due to the heavy mining. However, Ukrainian Border Patrol has built a secure route and planted the country's flag in this location. The ability to detect and monitor the movements of the enemy is a crucial component of modern warfare. All throughout the battlefield, and often hundreds of kilometers beyond it. The Oki eyeballs are home to swarms of spy and attack drones numbering in the thousands. Multiple technologies used for monitoring the project are integrated into one cohesive whole. The enemy is eliminated immediately thanks to data analysis and the transmission of intelligence. If we were to tell the enemy what we know about this plan, they would be able to anticipate our moves. But let's take a peek behind the scenes. In other words, sign up for updates. You may subscribe to our channel to receive updates and notifications whenever new videos are uploaded, including breaking news and in-depth reporting on the conflict in Ukraine. The Crimean Peninsula, as seen in our videos, continues to be the most important and strategic location in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. The effects of the Ukrainian military's recent advances in the south on Crimea will be discussed in today's breaking news. The Ukrainians, I must add, have made tremendous victories in their counterattack against the Russian army, and we will hear about those accomplishments and their plans for the future of the conflict today. You are aware that attention will turn to Crimea after southern Ukraine has been stabilized. The social climate in Crimea will be evaluated after several offensives have been launched against the peninsula. Our news feed will start with Severodonetsk. The Russians have suffered a major setback on the southern front after losing their main stronghold. Russian government officials have verified that the Ukrainians breached the infamous But fortification to the south of Severodonetsk. Taking a look at the terrain map, we can see that this location is fortified by its hilltop setting. The Ukrainians were able to do this once they made Verbova a top priority. The Ukrainians' ground commander was exceedingly patient and maintained a close eye on how and when the Russians were turning their soldiers, which allowed them to keep control of the position. After that, he organized a small Ukrainian assault unit, ambushed his opponents while they were distracted by the turn, and quickly gained complete command of the stronghold in a matter of minutes. Dmytro Kuleba, the foreign minister of Ukraine, has also claimed that the recent achievements of Ukrainian forces on the southern front may allow them to drive the Russians off of the next Crimean Peninsula. This was made in response to a question on whether or not it would be possible to drive the Russians off of the next Crimean Peninsula. It is very evident that we are now much closer to Crimea as a result of the progress made with Robert Tinner and the official comments. Explosions were reported recently at the strategic airbase in Crimea that serves as the home of the elite Russian Federation Army. In the area surrounding the Kroska airfield and the Staro-Kremesky shooting range, there was an explosion as well as gunshots. The occupying authorities did not provide any advance notification of the drills that were going to take place. Additionally, it was validated through the channels of local television that the ammo should not be destroyed just yet. The training complex known as Staro-Kremesky is located in the Russian military and is not far from the town of Kherson. According to reports from the Center for Investigative Journalism, the Russian 56th Guards Air Assault Regiment, which has been stationed in occupied Theodosia since December 1, 2021, uses it for training. Since March 1, 2014, soldiers from the Russian Black Sea Fleet have been stationed at the Kirovsky Military Airport, which is located to the south of the town of the same name in the east of the peninsula. Explosions rocked Theodosia before the Russians could get over the initial shock of the strikes on the vital runway. This happened before the Russians could even begin to recover. Locals and residents of Primorsky, a nearby town on the Crimean Peninsula that is currently under occupation, reportedly heard and saw a number of explosions. This was reported through the various local telegram channels. According to Sergei Aksionov, the air defense in the occupied part of Crimea was able to shoot down a cruise missile in the region's east. The occupants claimed that meteoric debris was to blame for the burning grass. A column of smoky clouds can be seen rising into the atmosphere. According to those with knowledge of the situation, the power line was severed when debris from the destroyed missile landed on it. Within the next hour, it is anticipated that the garbage will have been swept away. It has also been reported by the local news channels that ambulances traveling from Theodosia to Primorsky have arrived there. Explosions were also reported in the city of Alusta in Crimea. According to local telegram groups, there were explosions in the area of Perevalna, which is home to the 126th Separate Guards Coast Defense Brigade of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Residents of the area state that they heard more sounds than only explosions, including what may have been gunshots. Simultaneously, 3 Russian aircraft, including 2 helicopters, and 1 jet were engaged in a pursuit of the Ukrainian drone on the western part of the Crimean Peninsula, close to Cape Tarkhanker. Unfortunately, the hostile drone was immune to the gunfire used to try to bring it down. This information was sent to the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. Additionally, there was a video that was placed there that was comparable. It has been noted that Ukrainian intelligence drones are increasingly surviving engagements with enemy air defense as well as direct collisions with hostile aircraft without suffering any damage. This is a trend that is expected to continue. In the airspace above Cape Tarkhanker, an unmanned aerial vehicle, UAV, belonging to the Ukrainian military can be seen being chased by 2 attack helicopters, in addition to an airplane. The Ukrainian drone successfully navigated its way out of the conflict zone and returned to its home base without suffering any damage along the way. Additionally, not just in Crimea but also on the routes leading there were incidents of violent behavior. When the Kiev government announced the failure of a terrorist plot, it was displaying Russian propaganda in its purest form. The messages that were distributed on the Telegram channel run by the Russian Ministry of Defense were picked up by pro-Kremlin media. Russian defense officials reported that drones had attacked the bridge 3 times, and as a result, it was still closed to vehicle traffic. The first assault was alleged to have taken place at roughly 23:15. According to the occupants, this quickly brought a halt to the flow of traffic on the coach bridge. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the second ship made her way into the strait, and 10 minutes later, the third vessel arrived at the same spot. According to reports from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, all 3 drones have been successfully destroyed. It would appear that the attackers were not even successful in damaging the bridge. On the other hand, Russia is in no hurry to get back to business as usual. Since almost 8 hours ago, the route has been closed indefinitely. In what Kiev claims is an effort to recapture Crimea, the bridge that connects the peninsula to the rest of Russia has been blasted on multiple occasions. Crimea, which Russia took in 2014, has been a priority for Kiev during Moscow's push in Ukraine. Nevertheless, it has been under increasingly severe fire as of late. Crimea was a focus for Kiev throughout Moscow's advance in Ukraine. However, it was annexed by Russia in 2014. The governor of the peninsula, who was selected by Russia, made the assertion that Russian air defense forces intercepted and destroyed 3 Ukrainian missiles when they were flying over the bridge the previous month. The 18-kilometer concrete bridge is one of the pet projects of Russian President Vladimir Putin, and it has 2 parallel constructions, one of which is for road traffic and the other of which is for rail traffic. During the strike in July, the highway over the bridge, which is also used by the military to transport equipment, sustained significant damage. The building will continue to undergo renovations right up until the end of the calendar year. It is expected that the repair of the Russian building will cost 1.3 billion rubles. You might remember that in the wake of several assaults on the Crimean Bridge, the Russian invaders who took control of it strengthened it. In order to accomplish this goal, the Russians installed shields to thwart the drones of the Ukrainian Navy. The Ukrainian intelligence service claims that the installation of these barriers will make it more difficult for Ukrainian drones to carry out their missions, but they will not prohibit the drones from carrying out their missions entirely. The Russian Federation is being extremely cautious in order to protect the integrity of the Crimean Bridge. The bridge is a symbol of Russia's takeover of Crimea, but it also plays an important role in supplying Russian forces stationed on the mainland of Ukraine, in the Kherson region, and in Zaporizhia. Zaporizhia is located in the south of Russia. In the beginning of our film, we describe how the recent attacks that have taken place in and around Crimea have radically disrupted the lives of Russians who have established their homes in that region. Natalia Homanyuk believes that the humanitarian situation on the peninsula is currently in a critical state. The resistance movement as well as the partisan movement are both effective, but this will just make the water and power shortages that are already acute much worse. Homanyuk stated that any targets on the temporarily controlled peninsula that are capable of supplying the Black Sea Fleet are fair game for destruction since they form the enemy's reserves for refilling its fighting capability. These reserves are located on a temporarily controlled peninsula. I have faith that we will soon have a more accurate understanding of how the results of our efforts to weaken the adversary's military capacity will play out. This past weekend, a drone strike took place in the Russian territory of Kursk. The guerrilla organization known as the Russian Volunteer Corps claimed credit for the attack on the messaging app Telegram, stating that it was working in conjunction with the Ukrainian security service. The rebels stated that they were able to fly their drones across the open border and assault a military base where Putin's scavengers were hiding out. They claimed that they were successful in their mission. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, they have successfully neutralized the threat posed by the drones. The rebels rejected this, alleging that the Russian Defense Ministry and the governor of Kursk were trying to hide the fact that one of their air defense missiles had accidentally struck a residential high-rise. However, the rebels believed that the Russian Defense Ministry was trying to cover up this truth. It would appear that the conflict has extended beyond Ukraine and into neighboring countries. The conflict that Putin started almost 2 years ago is finally beginning to have an effect on Russia. We have seen time and time again that the Russian leader is powerless to stop it. It should not be too difficult to make an educated guess on the future frequency with which this will take place. Please show your support by giving our channel a like and subscribing to it so that you may be informed about the latest developments in the battle. We are grateful for the attention you have given us.